So we're back with part 2 of lesson 9, and we will make a couple of little cosmetic changes. I found a relatively simple way we could add a cart icon here, and that is actually through using Google's material icons. So I'll give you the link. So if we link to the Google APIs, their font style sheet, we can then link and use any icon. So I'm going to add this. I'll throw it in the chat. If I add this line of code, this link to our layout file, so we're already using Google Fonts. So I'm going to also add here a link to the material icons. And then we can use any icons we like. So I'm not going to get carried away. I am going to just add a cart icon here. So I've added this link to the material icons in my layout file. Again, this is optional, but some of you are asking about it, so what the heck, I'll show how to do it. And then I searched on material.io and I found this link to the shopping cart. So all we need to do to render this link is, I think if we use this code in our HTML, a span class material icons shopping _ cart, this should actually give us a cart link here. So I'm going to try that. So rather than having the text that says cart, I'll paste this in here and see what that does. Okay, so I get my little cart icon. And now if I shop, we get our little badge beside it. Could use a bit of alignment, but it's probably good enough. So here's the link to the material icons page. So by linking to the Google style sheet, we have access to all kinds of icons, and you can do them in different styles. So there's outlined or filled, rounded ones. So whatever sort of icons you want, there's lots of them here in this set. And they're open source, they're available to use freely. Yep. That's right, Mike. So if you wanted, we could change the color with CSS. There is actually one other CSS change I want to make that's been bugging me. We've used this BTN primary class. Yep, we can also change the size. I've used this BTN primary class, so all our buttons are still the original Bootstrap royal blue. I want to customize them so they're actually using the same kind of purple color that we styled our links with. So I'm going to override that. This has been bugging me for weeks. So I'm going to go to my www root CSS, my site.css. What did we set? Okay, so I'm going to change my BTN primary, the background color. I want it to be the same as our link color. I'm just going to try that. So now my buttons are now this kind of purple color. And I'll maybe change the hover as well. Which I won't worry about the hover for now. But at least they're purple rather than the royal blue because it matches the theme of our site. So the next thing we want to do, last thing we're going to do today, but it's going to take a little bit of work, is we want to build a checkout page, right? So we can shop, we can see how many items are in our cart, which is great. We can remove from cart, we've prevented duplicates, so things are kind of coming along nicely. So our next step is we want to create this checkout method. And there's going to be two versions of the checkout. There's going to be a get and there's going to be a post. So the get is going to display a checkout form. And then the post is going to save all the information and generate an order object with that information. So our first step is we want to create a checkout method and checkout form. So we'll go back to our shop controller. First, we're going to set out our shop checkout method. So this method takes no parameters. And it's basically just going to return a view. So our get will be simple. Our post is obviously going to be more complicated. It always is. Now I'm going to go and look at our models for a minute because this is where we're going to need a couple of new models. So right now, we've got category, product, and cart. We need to create two new model classes. We need an order model and an order detail model. And that's going to have a one-to-many relationship. One order has many order details. One order detail belongs to one and only one order. So if a customer buys a shop and I put 3 different items in my cart, right? I'll have 3 records in the cart table in this case. When I go to check out, once I pay, which we'll do next week, it should create 1 order and 3 order detail records for each line item. So I'll just go and put a few different items in the cart. 1, 2, and 3. So when I check out, it should create 1 order, and then each one of these cart items will be a separate order detail, but they'll all be tied together with an order ID foreign key value. So we don't have models for this, but I've put the code you need on Blackboard. So make sure you're signed into Blackboard into the week 9 folder. So at first, I'm going to create a model called order.cs. And I'm going to copy all of these properties from Blackboard. We're not going to spend time manually designing the orders. I've already designed them for you. So copy that, and I'm going to go to my models. I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a class. The class name will be called order, singular. There's no S on the end. Our model names should always be singular. So let's create an order class. And then I'm just going to paste in the properties. We'll have a primary key, an order date, who the customer is, their address, city, province, and postal code, which will display with a space. So I'm going to use this display name. And then it will have a child reference to order details. So there's an error here because order detail doesn't exist. We're going to make that in a minute. So create your order model, paste in the properties, and then just add the missing reference here to make this error go away. We want to reference system.componentModel.data annotations. So we can set up a friendly name for the postal code field that has a space. We have an error on line 23, but once we build this model, which we're going to do next, the error will go away. So save your order model and then create a second class called OrderDetail. Again, it should be singular with no S in the name. So I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer. I'm going to right-click my models, and again, I'm going to add a class. This time it's called OrderDetail. Singular, no S's. And the definition for the OrderDetail model, that's on Blackboard in the next item. So I'll create my empty class. We'll go back to Blackboard, and here are the properties here. So I'll just copy those, paste them in. So our order detail has a primary key. It has two foreign keys, order ID and product ID. Every order detail has a quantity, and then it's got a cost. I guess I could have called that price, but okay, I'll just call it cost. And so it has two parents. What order does this item belong to, and which product is it for? So I'm going to save that as well. Don't need to make any changes here, just copy paste. Once I create order detail, notice if I go back to order, this error goes away now. There's no longer any error in my order model. So just create two empty classes, order and order detail, copy and paste the properties from Blackboard in. So now in our database, here are all our tables. We've got all the ASP.NET tables for authentication and authorization, and we've got our carts table, categories, and products. So we've created two new models in our project now. So what step do we need to take next now that we've created new models in the project?
A data migration?
Right.
Or database migration?
We are going to need a database migration, which will copy this to an orders table, and it'll copy this one to an order details table. Before we can do the migration, we need to do one other step. I could create the migration now, but if I do right now, the migration is going to be empty. Nope, we don't need any views. So let's see what happens. You don't have to create a migration yet, so don't follow me. I'm going to show you what happens when I create one. So I'll run add migration. So try creating order tables.
You need to add it to the DB context.
You got it.
I forgot the name of the thing, but that one.
Right. So I'm going to create this migration. So it works, but notice my migration is empty. There's no code here that will modify the database. So this migration's kind of useless. Before I do this, Lindsay's absolutely right. We need to go to our data folder and open up application DB context. So what do we need to do in here before creating the new migration? Notice what's already here. We've got to add to this file. We need 2 lines of code. Dan is right. So now add db sets for order and order detail so we can run a migration to create these tables and then use these DB sets for CRUD. So I'm going to create a DB set of type order. It's called orders. And a second one for order detail. So anytime we create a new model, this is the process. Create the model, create a new DB set. So you'll notice our type is singular, but I'm giving it a plural name. This is by convention. And this DB set is an entity we can use to query the database and also save. So we can save adds, edits, and deletes. So add these two lines to your application DB context. I've put them in the chat if you're too lazy to type them. Now I need to try my migration again. Once we declare these, our migration should write the script to build these two tables. So I'm going to go back to my console. I'm going to add a migration. Try creating order tables again. So this is going to create a new migration file. But rather than it being empty like the old one, it now has commands to create my orders table and then create the order details table with the foreign keys. So now I can run the command update database. It's going to execute these migrations. The first one won't do anything. The second one will create my two tables. Tells me it's done. If I refresh my database in Management Studio now, now I've got two new tables, orders with the primary key and order details that has one primary key and two foreign keys. So our migration worked. So if we look at the relationship, our order details really serves as a junction table. It sits in between the products table and the orders table because products and orders have a many-to-many relationship. One order has many products and one product can be in many orders. So the order detail uses both as foreign keys that matches up which product is in which order. And Management Studio actually has the ability to create an ERD, a database diagram. If I click on database diagrams, you don't have to do this. I'm just showing you this is here. It's useful. Do I want to create them? I'll just say yes to this. And now I can actually create a database diagram right in Management Studio if I want a visual of how this works. So let's see, I'll add carts, categories. Actually, for now, I'll just add orders, products, and order details. Because these tables are already related in the database, we've already created the foreign keys and the relationships. Just let this run for a minute. Hopefully it doesn't crash. Oh, okay, you've already seen this? Okay, that's good. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for letting me know. So yeah, once you've built it, you can use this for your diagram. Mine just sort of died on me, so won't worry about it for now. So I'll close up my migrations. I can close my application DB context. And I'm going to come back to my shop controller. Okay, there. Right. So you can see order details is the junction table that sits in between. There's no direct relationship between products and orders. They are related through the order details table that reconciles this many-to-many relationship. So now I want to create a checkout view. So our checkout view is actually going to use the order class as the model. So we want to use scaffolding to build a form so we can capture the customer address when they're checking out. So in my Solution Explorer, I'm going to go to Views and Shop, and I'm going to add a view. I don't want to build the view from scratch. I want Visual Studio to write most of it for me, so I'm going to pick Razor View. I'll do that again in case you missed it. So Views, Shop, we'll right-click, choose Add View, and pick Razor View, not the empty one. I'll click the Add button. Our view name is going to be Checkout. Our template is going to be Create. This is going to build a blank form for the shopper and ask them to enter their address, city, postal code, province. So the model we're using here is our order model. The data context will be our application DB context as it is always, and our layout page, same as always, using our shared layout. So enter these options in the little pop-up window, that says Add Razor View. Checkout, Create, Order, Application DB Context. And I'll click Add. And once this is done, so we get a form that says checkout with all of the fields from our order model. So I'm going to leave the form without making any changes and go try it out. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so my cart's empty. Put something in it, add to cart. And now I'm going to go to checkout. Okay, so now we've got a functional form that the scaffolding built for us, saved us some time, but there's probably some changes required here. I can think of at least 4 or 5 things on here we should modify. What changes do you suggest we make here? We could do that with the order date. Yes, I was thinking along with Mike, rather than this shouldn't be an input at all, right? We should make this automatic. Same with the customer ID. So we're going to actually remove these and fill these fields programmatically. It doesn't really probably make sense to let the customer choose the date of their order. It should be the current date. So I'm going to remove those first 2 fields. Kunwar, so the email address will actually use that for the customer ID. good suggestion. So we're also going to change this page. This page is public, but we're going to change it so a user has to log in order to check out. And once they log in, we have access to their email address. So we will automatically fill it in here in the customer ID. Any other changes we should make?
No, but mine's not connecting and I don't know why. I'm just
Okay.
forgetting that it
I
doesn't
will come
exist
back
on the
to that.
local host.
Okay, I will come back to your issue in a moment. There's a couple of other obvious changes that need to be made to this form. Right, the total should be automatic and the customer shouldn't be able to change it. Absolutely. In fact, we'll probably just hide it here. We'll show it on the next page, which will be the payment page. I also want to clean up, we don't need this H4 here that says order. It can just say checkout. Instead of my button saying create, it should say something like continue to payment. And this back to list that goes back to the index, I want to take out that. So let's clean up. These are mostly just HTML changes. So let's go into our checkout view and let's clean up these things. I'm going to start at the top, line 10 that says order. I don't need that. I'm going to get rid of my first two form groups. So the first two sections of the form for order date and customer ID, we're going to remove those because we're going to populate those automatically with the customer's email address and the order date. So I'm going to delete those. My address also, if we look, it's also a single line text box. I'm going to change the address from an input. I think a text area makes more sense. And text area tags are not self-closing. So I've got to add a separate closing tag. Because some people have longer addresses. To make sure they enter them accurately, we should give them a larger box so they can see the whole address. That single line text box is too small for an address. I'm going to remove the order total field entirely. Again, we're going to populate that one in code. I'm going to change my button. Instead of saying create, we'll maybe add here, it says payment with a couple of arrows. And down at the bottom, I'm going to remove this little div that says back to list. The whole site exists to get people to the checkout page. So we don't really want them leaving at this point. We don't want to give them links for them to leave. We want them to move forward and put in their credit card and give us money. So I haven't added anything. I've just deleted a bunch of stuff and I've changed this address input to a text area. I will also maybe make our 4 inputs required. I should have added that to the model, but for now, I'll at least add this validation in the form. So you can't submit the checkout page unless you've entered your address, your city, your province, and your postal code. So make all of those required. We could make them required in our order model as well. It's probably a good idea to do. I should have done this in the original code I posted to Blackboard. But I'm going to make all those fields required here too. You don't absolutely have to, but it is a good idea. So now a user cannot check out without providing their address, city, province, and postal code. So we also want to make this page only available to users who log in. So that way we can get their email address, we know who they are. We're not going to offer guest checkout on our site. So how would we do this? How would we make sure a user can shop anonymously? Yeah, Kunwar, I feel like you're shouting at us. Jillian, I was thinking the same. What do we do so that a user has to log in? We're just teasing you, Kunwar. How do we make our checkout page secure? So a user must log in before they can get to the checkout page. There's something we should do in our controller. Because right now, anybody can get here. Well, should only administrators have access to this page? Right. So people have to have an account, but they don't have to be administrators.
Should we do in the controller authorize roles users? And that for that method?
We don't even really need any roles. So you're on the right track, Lindsay. We can just use authorize. So authorize is going to prevent access to anonymous users. We don't really need to specify a particular role here. As long as they have a login, that's going to be good enough. So I'm going to add the authorize decorator above our method. And I'll just add a reference to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.authorization. So if I try and reload my page now, we can tell I'm anonymous. So now it's going to prompt me to log in before I can see this form. So that's the result we want. So I go to shop, I buy something, put it in the cart, I hit checkout. Now I've got to log in. So I can log in with, say, a Google account. And now I can get in here. So authorize, we're just doing authentication. We're not doing authorization. The roles don't really matter, but users must sign up and sign in this case. So now we need to write the post method. Again at shop/checkout. So we're going to use authorize here again. And we're going to distinguish from the checkout method above by declaring this uses HTTP post. We're also going to validate against cross-site scripting attacks. So users from other domains can't create a form that posts to .netduds.com/shop/checkout. So our method, as usual, returns an iAction result. It's called checkout, but the signature is different. Our get method takes no parameters. Our checkout method, first it's got to bind the 4 fields on our checkout form, which are address, city, province, and postal code. And we are binding this to the order model. We're going to create a new order and populate the address, city, province, and postal code from the form. So we're binding the 4 form inputs to the matching order properties. In the parameter list. So that happens automatically when we call bind. And now we took out the date, the customer ID, and the total. We took those out from the form because we don't want the customers filling that stuff in. We're going to fill those things automatically. So for the date, we'll use datetime.now. For the customer ID, we can use the user.identity.name. That gives us the customer's email address that shows up here. The order total we can calculate using one of those quick link queries. So we're going to get the current user's cart. And again, we can do the quick math. Take each item, quantity, multiply it by the price, and then sum the whole thing together. So our order has 8 properties. I'll put the code back. A primary key that'll get generated in the database when we save the order. The order ID, order date, which is automatic. Customer ID, which is automatic. Address, city, province, and postal code. Those things the user is going to type in the checkout form. And then it's got a total, which is also automatic. So there's two more things we want to do in this method. We want to store the order in a session variable, redirect to payment so a user can pay through Stripe Payment Gateway. We'll do the Stripe payment next week. So I want to take this order that now has these 4 properties from the form and these 3 properties that we're filling, and I want to stick this whole order in a session variable. So I'm going to call set. But now we run into a little bit of an obstacle. As you can see from the little menu that pops up, we can't actually save this order object to a session variable. Why not? Or how can you tell from this menu that pops up? Notice I've got 3 set methods here. What types of session variables can we create? We've got set, which says it wants some kind of byte value. We've got set int32, which lets us set an integer value. Or we have set string, which obviously lets us create a string value. None of these are going to work. We don't want a byte, an integer, or a string. we want to set a complex object, an order object, in a session variable. Well, the .NET session object by default, it doesn't support this. So what we need to do is we need to use a little extension library that's going to allow us to save a complex object like an order as a session variable. So I'm just going to comment that line for just a second. And we're going to need to come back to it. So there's a link on Blackboard that we're going to need to do this. So if you go to Blackboard, underneath the order detail, there's a link here to a little tutorial extending the .NET Core session object. So some developer created a little open source library we can use. And they explain the .NET Core session has three methods for writing session variables: set, setInt, and setString. Set takes a byte array. SetInt and setString obviously take integers and strings. So there's no method available for storing a complex object, but that's what we need to do. So what this developer did was create a little class here, and he wrote two methods, setObject and getObject, that basically will convert our object to JSON. So setObject writes a JSON representation and stores the JSON as a string. And then when we want to read the session variable, it deserializes it, converts it from JSON back into our original object type. So we're going to use this library in our code. So first I'm going to go to Solution Explorer. Move my video over here. I'm going to right-click my project, not my solution at the top. I'm going to right-click my project, and I'm going to add a class. And I'm going to call it Session Extensions. That's what his class is called. So we'll create a new class right in the root of the project, down where our startup folder is, that we'll call Session Extensions. I'm going to put a link to where this code comes from because it's third-party code. So A, I'm not trying to take credit for it, and B, if let's say this ever breaks or gets updated years from now, I know where this code came from. I know where to go back and look. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy his whole class definition. Notice his class is static, so there's no constructor needed. We don't need to call the new method to use the set object and get object. So just copy all the code in this block. And I'm just going to overwrite the existing class definition. So right now, all I've got is the namespace and the link. I'll just paste it in like this. Now there's a few references we need to make. I got a few errors. So it doesn't recognize the session interface. So I'll add the suggested reference to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.HTTP. Those two errors go away. I also need to reference the Json converter that Microsoft uses, which is newtonsoft.json. That's a JSON parser that allows us to read and write JSON format. So when I add those two methods, now my code will compile. All my errors go away. So we don't need to change these methods at all. We're going to leave them exactly as they are in the developer's library. So now we can go back to our checkout method. We're almost done for today, so just bear with me for another 10 or 15 minutes. we can now use the setObject method that will take our object, convert it to JSON, and actually store that as a string. Next week, we'll call getObject when we want to read the order for the payment and saving to the database. So this week, we only need setObject. We'll use getObject next week. So now I'm going to return to my shop controller. And now when I type get, suddenly we've got the getObject method here. Sorry, I want to call setObject. So we didn't have this before we created our extension library. So we're going to create a new session object called order. And we're going to pass in our order variable. Using session extensions.cs library. And lastly, we want to redirect to an action called payment, which we will build next week. I'll put this whole thing on paste bin. We'll give it a try. So perfectly acceptable to use third-party code when the thing we're trying to accomplish doesn't exist in the framework we're using. So there's the link to the checkout method. So we're going to make sure our user's logged in. We're processing a form post. We're making sure the post didn't come from somebody else's website. We're filling the address, city, province, and postal code from the checkout form. And then we're auto-populating the date, the customer, and the total. We're going to store the whole order in a session variable using this extension. And then we're going to take the user to the payment page. Right now, we're going to get a blank screen because the payment method doesn't exist. We're not going to create that this week. We will do it next week. I'm going to go and try out my code. Could also look at bumping my margin up here, see if that moves my badge up a bit. I'm going to start shopping. I'll just put one item in the cart. I'll check out. I'm already logged in. I'll fill out my checkout form. And I just want to make sure I get a blank screen and it takes me to payment. As long as I got here, that's where I want to be. Okay, so we'll build the payment page next week. I'll just try one thing. Just see if I can bump that up a little. That'll move my badge up a little. Not sure if that's the best way to do it. No. Okay, I'll have to figure out how to move my badge up. Doesn't seem to be it. Okay, I'm going to push our code. I just want to answer a question. I put another resource on Blackboard. I want to answer a question that Sierra asked, which was a good question. She emailed yesterday and said, what do I do if I want to create a view that's using different models? Right now, all the views we're creating are based on a single model. So there is an item, a class called the view model. And basically, the view model allows you to define your own custom model for a view. So I'll post this link. If you want to read about how to do it, I'll add this link. So for example, we've got a student model, a student address model, and we want to show both of these things together in a view. So we can define a view model. So here's a student, here's an address. And in the view model, we can combine the different properties that we want to show. And then in our controller, we create a new view model and pass it. And then we use the view model as the declaration of our view. So I'll include this link. Some of you may want to do that at some point. I'll add this link here down below. Tutorial. So sometimes our views are complex and we want to show data from multiple models. So the last thing I want you to do today is I want you to sign up for Stripe. So you can go to Stripe, which is a really popular payment gateway, and just create a free account for yourself. Okay? We're not going to use it this week, but next week we want to start building the Stripe payment integration into our cart. We're going to build a payment page where we can send test payments to the Stripe sandbox and process those responses back. And if we get a successful response, we're going to save the order to our database, generate an order confirmation page, as well as build an order history section for our customers, and an order details and order history page for our administrators as well. So you don't need to use the account this week, but I'm going to assume by next week you've already created the accounts. And then we're going to, in class, sort of follow the documentation about how to integrate, how to accept the payment, and there's documentation for all kinds of different languages, including .NET. So we'll look at how to do all this next week. I mentioned in-class lab next week. Sorry, the in-class lab is not for several more weeks. I apologize. So there is no quiz, there's no homework. The only thing you have to do is, for next week, fill out this form and click the confirmation. That's it. Okay, I'm going to push my code up to GitHub for you guys now. I'll upload the videos as soon as they're done. Have a great week. You've worked hard on your assignment. I will get everyone's marks back to them before next week's class. If you haven't submitted yet, please submit today. Your assignment is already late, and I do not want to take any more late deductions than I need to. Okay, have a great week, everyone. I will see you all next week. Thank you.